everyone, good morning. We are from group 5 and we will present about the importance of wheat and classification of wheat. Before that, let me introduce our member of group. I am Kanistha Nurfaqih Arzanti with student number 071, Andi Nisrina Arum Sekar with student number 072, Jafar Ali Rosyidin with student number 074, Chiara Denise Ante, Maria Victoria Acedillo, and Debbie Jaline Volante. So, what is a weed? Weeds are plants that grow out of place, have a negative value, compete with human in utilizing land, grow spontaneously, and grow anywhere. Weeds are plants that have to adapt to artificial habitats and cause disruption to all human activities. Based on plant cultivation, which are plants whose existence can cause disturbances and losses for cultivated plants. So weeds have the following characteristic. First, weeds have seeds that are easy to sprout in a variety of environments. Second, weeds can do the self-fertilization. Third, weeds are easy to adapt to the environment, and fourth, weeds can grow rapidly throughout the vegetative phase until the flowering phase.
Now I'm gonna talk about the losses that caused by weeds and the profits or benefits that we can get from weeds. First, I'm gonna talk about losses that caused by weeds. Losses incurred by weeds can occur in various fields related to agriculture. The problem of weeds is actually an important issue in agriculture businesses, but it doesn't get as much attention as pests or other plant diseases. In general, the problems caused by weeds on agricultural cropland are as follows. First, there's competition. The presence of weeds in the plant environment, it causes weed competition with staple plants in the fight for groundwater, sunlight, nutrients, growing space, and air. This will result in stunted plant growth and decrease the quality of yields. The highest competition occurs during a critical period of plant growth. A critical period is the period of time when weeds and cultivated plants are in a state of active competition. Weeds have a strong competitive ability for carbon dioxide, water, sunlight, and nutrients, so weed growth can slow the growth of staple plants. And then the second is host for pests and disease. Temporary living place for pests and disease so that it is possible to breed properly. As a result, these pests or disease will attack and shift staple crops. And then the third is allelopathic compounds. There are several types of weeds that have allelopathic properties, namely the ability to secrete substances that are toxic and can inhibit the growth of certain plants. A number of types of weeds can secrete substances or liquids that are poisonous in the form of chemical compounds that can interfere with and inhibit the growth of plants that live around them. And then the fourth is disrupting agricultural activities. Presence of large quantities of weeds will cause difficulties in carrying out agricultural activities, such as fertilization, harvesting with mechanical tools, and others. And the last is decrease the quality of yields. Weeds reduce the quality of plant seeds. Some of the part of weeds that are also harvested and mixed with the harvest will have a negative influence on crop yields, because they can poison, contaminate, decrease the purity, or give a taste and smell that is not good. So now I'm gonna talk about the benefits or the profits that we can get from weeds. Weeds are nicknamed for plants disrupting organisms, but it can be utilized in at least 10 things according to the needs of human life. The 10 things are 1. Weeds are used as organic fertilizers and soil destruction. 2. As soil cover and land conservation. 3. As the main building material of the roof. 4. As a traditional medicinal ingredient. 5. As a raw material of craft. 6. As an ornamental plant or a living fence. 7. As a producer of animal feed. 8. As a bioherbicide material. 9. As a material that produces regulatory substances to grow plants. And the 10 is as a foodstuff.
Let's now come to the importance of knowing weeds. So as you can see on screen, we have listed 4 benefits or importance of knowing weeds. First is that it protects crop yields from decreasing. Weeds, as we know, compete with the plants for nutrients from the soil and sunlight, causing crop growth to be stunted. As a result, farmers and gardeners harvest low quality plants. However, if weeds are controlled immediately in a plantation, they will not be able to compete with the plant's needs, resulting in abundant harvest. So that is the first importance. Second, it avoids the overuse of herbicides. Understanding weed growth will assist farmers in knowing when and how to weed, allowing them to avoid overusing herbicides in their garden or plantation. By doing so, they will be able to avoid the risk of negatively impacting the plants and likewise causing contamination to the soil and other organisms. The third one is that it will enable you or us to become successful gardeners. Weeds are a problem in many plantations. Some of them can be easily controlled with specific herbicides, while others cannot. However, if you understand the various weeds classification, you will be able to easily determine how to control them and develop a good management plan that will allow you to become a successful gardener. Lastly, knowing weeds will also avoid the beneficial weeds to being harmed. We might think that all weeds are useless, but the truth is that not all weeds are really unbeneficial. In fact, some of them are highly nutritious for animal feed. They can be harvested, cut for feed, and left to themselves. Farmers who understand weeds thoroughly would be able to avoid inhibiting the growth of beneficial weeds and instead focus on the harmful ones. So, those are the 4 important reasons for knowing about weeds. Again, to protect crop yields from decreasing, to avoid the overuse of herbicides, to become successful gardeners, and to avoid harming the beneficial weeds. We shall now move on to the different classification of weeds, and let us first talk about the classifications based on morphology. So there are 3 categories of weeds under this classification, and these are the grasses, sedges, and broad-leaved weeds. So let us first talk about the grass. All weeds in the Poaceae family are known as grasses, which characteristically have long and narrow spiny leaves. Two of its most common examples are the Echinocoloa colonum and the Cynodon dactylon. If you want, you may search for these grasses on the internet so that you can see their physical appearance. The next one is the sedges. This category includes weeds from the Cyperaceae family, and their leaves are mostly from the base of the modified stem, which may or may not have tubers. Some of its examples are Cyperus rotundus and Fimbristylius miliaceae. So the last category under this classification are the broad-leaved weeds. Based on what I've read before, this is the most common type of weed, and all dicotyledon weeds are broad-leaved weeds. Some of its examples are Flavaria australasica, Digeira arvensis, and Tridax procumbens. The next classification is based on lifespan. So just like the classification based on morphology, this classification based on lifespan also has 3 categories. So these are the annual weeds, biennials, and perennials. But let us first discuss the annual weeds, okay? Annual weeds are weeds that live only for a season or year and complete their life cycle in that season or year. So that's why they are called annuals, because these weeds live only for a year. So its characteristics includes tiny herb with shallow roots and frail stems. It produces a large numbers of seeds, and the most common propagation is through seeds. Annual weeds are still divided into 2 subcategories. As you can see on screen, these are the monsoon annuals and the winter annuals. Examples of monsoon annuals are Commelina benghalensis, Barhavia erecta, and for the winter annuals, we also have Chenopodium album. So the next category is biennial. So these weeds complete their vegetative growth in the first season, flower and set seeds in the following season, and then die. That's how these weeds grow. These are mostly found in uncropped areas. Examples of this include Alternanthera echinata and Daucus carota. So let us now move on to the last category under these classifications. So we have now the perennials. So perennials have lifespan of more than 2 years, and they can live indefinitely. They adopt to survive in severe environmental conditions. And these weeds are reproduced not only through seeds, but also through underground stems, roots, rhizomes, tubers, and so on, and are thus classified further into these simple perennials, bulbous perennials, corm perennials, and the creeping perennials. So simple perennials are propagated only by seeds. One of its examples in the Sonchus arvensis. So that's the first picture on this slide. And this is an example of a simple perennial. So the next one is the bulbous perennials. These are the plants that have modified stem with scales and reproduce primarily through bulbs and seeds. So Allium sp is an example of this perennial. We also have corm perennials. These are the plants with a modified shoot and fleshy stem that reproduce through the use of corms and seeds. What you can see, as what you can see in the third picture on this slide, is a Timothy grass, and it is an example of corm perennials. So the last subcategory of perennials is a creeping perennials. Okay, these are the weeds that reproduce not only through seeds, but they can also reproduce through rhizomes, which are the plants having underground stems, or either through stolons, which are the weeds that have creeping stems above the ground. Roots, these are the plants having an enlarged root system with numerous buds. And lastly, the tubers having modified rhizomes adapted for storage of food.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria Victoria Acedillo. I am a student from Central Bicol State University of Agriculture, and I am one of the exchange students here in the University of Yogyakarta. And I will be discussing the classification of weeds based on the economic value. So the first type is the absolute weed. These are the weeds or the plants that are considered as weeds wherever they grow. An example for this is the Bermuda grass or the Cynodon dactylon, the nut grass, which is the Cyperus rotundus, and the jungle rice, which is near relative to Oryza sativa. And the next type is the relative weeds. Relative weeds is a crop plant that is growing in another crop field. For example, a sorghum plant that has grown in a cornfield, or a corn plant has grown in sorghum field. Another example that we can see extensively is the rice that is of another variety can be considered as a weed in another variety of rice that is planted. For example, Japonica rice is planted in a field or has grown in a field that had an indica variety mixed into it. It is easily known which is the different variety because of the physical characteristics of the rice plant itself. And some plants or rice plants are taller than the others. Some have broader leaves or different tillering, which is indicative of there being other variety. If a farmer is planting a specific variety of rice for seed production, it is important to remove these other plants so that the purity of the variety is sustained. This other variety of rice that has mistakenly grown in a specific rice field can be considered as a weed, even though they are of the same rice crop. So, the difference between the absolute and relative weeds are this. The absolute weed has no economic value. It is difficult to control, and eradication is even more difficult, and absolute weed is not considered as a crop plant. Meanwhile, relative weed is having some economic value, but it is growing wrongly or mistakenly in a particular field wherein it has no economic value. A relative weed is not so difficult to control, and a relative weed is actually a crop plant. The next classification I will be discussing is the classification of weeds based on soil and soil type. Some of the weed species are closely associated with a particular type of soil, though not in a really strict sense. Sometimes, the same species may also occur in other soil types. These are the kinds of weeds that grow in black cotton soil. These are weeds that are closely allied to those that grow in dry conditions. For example, this weed that is called in English as the worm killer, Aristolochia bracteata. This is called as worm killer because in traditional medicine it is commonly used as a deworming or for purging of parasitic worms in animals or in humans. Another kind of weed grows in red soils. They are like the weeds of garden lands consisting of various classes of plants. For an example is the wandering Jew or the Commelina benghalensis. Another type of weed is a weed that grows in light, sandy, or loamy soils. These weeds occur in soils having good drainage, like the weeds of tumba or the Leucas aspera. Another kind of weed grows in laterite soils. What are laterite soils? These are the soils that are colored red, which occurs because of high iron oxide content. These kinds of soil are said to be found in wet and hot tropical areas. Lateralization means tropical weathering. It's a process wherein there is a weathering of the soils. Types of weeds or examples of weeds are Lantana camara or Aspergilla arvensis. Another subtype of or subclassification are the weeds that grow according to soil pH or acidity and alkalinity of the soil. These weeds can be classified into three categories. The acidophile are the weeds that thrive in acidic soil. Examples are sourweed or the Rumex atisocela. Basophile are the weeds that thrive in saline and alkaline soil. Example is the dandelion or the Taraxacum species. And the neutrophile are the weeds of neutral soils. For example is the Indian nettle or the Acalypha indica.
Good morning everyone, I am Debbie and today I am going to talk about classification of weeds based on the degree of harm and based on its dependence on other hosts. Based on the degree of harm, we have two classifications of weeds. The first one is the general weed. General weeds are easy to control, less harmful, and they produce less seeds. While the second one is the noxious weed. Noxious weeds are difficult to control, they are more invasive, they produce more seeds, and they are easily spread. An example of a noxious weed is the Imperata cylindrica, also known as the Kogon grass or Japanese blood grass. It is native to Southeast Asia and is an extremely invasive species of weed. Another example of a noxious weed is the Micania micrantha, also known as the bitter vine or hemp vine. It is considered one of the top 100 most invasive species of weed that can cause serious damage to the ecosystem and can also cause economic loss. Next one is the classification of weeds based on its dependence on other hosts. The first one is the total parasitic. An example of a total parasitic weed is the Cuscuta reflexa. It is a leafless type of weed that grows over a host plant. It can outgrow the host over a very short period of time. Next is the semi-parasitic species. An example of a semi-parasitic weed is the Orobanse indica, also known as the broom rape. It is a parasitic flowering species that is completely dependent on other plants for nutrients. It attaches its roots to the roots of other plants that eventually become their hosts. The last one is the independent species. An example of an independent weed is the Cyperus rotundus, also known as nutgrass. It is one of the most invasive species and it is spread worldwide in the tropical regions. This type of weed reduces crop yield not just because of its invasive properties, but because its roots releases chemicals that are toxic to other plants.
Based on the area of origin. Based on the area of origin, weeds are divided into domestic weeds and exotic weeds. First, domestic weeds. Domestic weeds are original weeds somewhere or regions. For example, for those of Indonesia, with alang-alang or Imperata cylindrica in Indonesia. And second, exotic weeds. Exotic weeds are weeds originating from other regions or countries. For example, with Diakins or Eichhornia crassipes from Brazil. Then, based on weeds growing habitat. First, aquatic weeds. Generally, the weeds of water grow in water, whether floating, sinking or half sinking. These weeds can be a narrow leafy weed, or puzzle. Example of reforms Cyperus. Considered harm because of increased evaporation and loss of water from plant leaves, because the leaves are wide and their rapid growth. The decline in the amount of light entering the waters, causing a decrease in oxygen solubility in water, or DO, or dissolved oxygen, and in the dead plants will go down to the bottom of the water so as to accelerate the siltation process. And the types of water, which are divided into three. First, with water whose leaves floating water surface, like Eichhornia crassipes, like this. And second, with water that sinks in water, or like this Serapophyllum immersum. And with water that arise to the surface grows from the base or sticking out, like Nymphea sp. Terrestrial weeds, which grow on land, among other in more and plantations. Mainland weeds that grow on plantations are very dependent on the types of main plant, soil, climate, and planting patterns. Example of Ageratum conizoides.
That's all the presentation from us. If you have a question, you can write down on the comment section. Thank you very much. Bye.